And finally, since this video is about Christmas, I bet many of you are wondering which location Oda has made to be the North Pole. After all, Santa's workshop and home is there. Also, if I'm claiming that Joy Boy represents Santa Claus, that would mean that finding the North Pole in the story should show us where Joy Boy lived at some point in the Void Century. I'll give you a clue. This is a map of the North Pole imagined by a Flemish cartographer, Gerardus Mercator, drawn in 1595. Does this remind you of anything? To me, the shape reminds me of Enies Lobby. It's also interesting that Enies Lobby also goes by Judicial Island, the Japanese name for it being Shihonashima. And this is interesting because this map drawn by Gerardus looks like it has 4 rivers, each pointing to a cardinal direction, the north, south, west and east. Shiho, meaning judicial, can also be a wordplay in Japanese to mean 4 directions. This also ties into the world government symbol, which is a cross. As I mentioned earlier, the word cross can be a wordplay on kurosu, as in Santa Claus. I'm starting to wonder if the world government just stole the flag of the people they defeated in the Void Century. Enies Lobby in Japanese, when romanized, is Enies Lobby. Does any of you remember what the Japanese word for Jesus is? It's Iesu. Again, a reference of Jesus, who I believe is a figure in One Piece that crosses over with Santa Claus. Enies Lobby is also called the Hirujima, meaning afternoon island, and Fuyajima, the never night island, as it is always daytime there. The Arctic, or the North Pole, in our world is called the land of the midnight sun, because for half of the year in summer, the sun never sets. We should also point out that if we are to believe that Enies Lobby was Joy Boy's home, it is a real possibility that Joy Boy's Devil Fruit ability has permanently changed this island to never go dark. After all, Nika is the sun god. We have seen examples of this kind of effect on an environment in Punk Hazard, for example, with Aokiji and Akainu. Finally, do you all remember the method in which Luffy and his nakama got to Enies Lobby? It was the sea train. There is a 1985 children's picture book called The Polar Express. There is an animated film adaptation of this story, which you may have heard of, starring Tom Hanks. Basically, spoiler alert, the Polar Express was a train that took a bunch of kids to the North Pole where they met Santa. So basically, just like in the Polar Express, Luffy and his nakama rode on the sea train, the Rocket Man, to get to Enies Lobby, aka the North Pole. We even had Sodom and Gomorrah attached to Rocket Man, pulling the Frankie family's ship, which ties into Santa and his sleigh. Let's look to the Greeks for more connections between Enies Lobby and the North Pole. In Greek mythology, Hyperboreans were mythical giants who lived in the furthest north of the world. The name means beyond Boreas, Boreas being the god of the north wind. Despite the north being a frigid part of the world, the Hyperboreans lived in a sunny and temperate land. In fact, it was quote-unquote an earthly paradise of eternal youth and abundance. However, it was so tricky to get to that only semi-divine heroes like Hercules was ever capable of visiting it. It is said that the sun god Apollo would spend the winters there amongst the Hyperboreans. They were even said to have worshipped Apollo and had a temple dedicated to him. So, a whole lot of keywords jump out at me there. The Hyperboreans were mythical giants. The race in One Piece that immediately pops into mind are the ancient giants. Then we see that the land these giants lived in was a paradise, which is the name of the first half of the Grand Line which Enies Lobby is located in. Then there's talks about eternal youth, which ties to the endgame of One Piece. The semi-divine heroes, who were the only ones capable of reaching the land, are clearly people like Luffy and Roger. Apollo, of course, is the One Piece equivalent of Nika and Joy Boy, and the Temple of the Sun God makes me think of Shindora, the city of gold, because gold typically symbolizes the sun. So, what if Enies Lobby was the North Pole in One Piece during the Void Century? In the current world map of the One Piece world, that doesn't really make sense, but maybe there was a shift in the rotation of the Earth or something, which could cause Enies Lobby to no longer be at the North Pole? And what if, like the Hyperboreans who were in fact mythical giants, Enies Lobby originally belonged to the ancient giants, and they're mixed race descendants like the Oni, and they worship the sun god Nika? You know, I think it would make sense too if Enies Lobby represented the sun because of Joy Boy, since when we look at the other 2 facilities connected to the Tarai Current, we see that Marineford is represented as the moon. What does Impel Down represent to balance the sun and moon? I guess it would fit better if we look at it more like this. Enies Lobby represented the sun and sky, Marineford represented the sea and the moon, and Impel Down represents the earth and the underworld. I bet that some of you are starting to think that this sounds a lot like the stories of the 3 gods, or rather the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades in Greek mythology, or Amaterasu, Tsukiyomi, and Susanoo, the 3 siblings in Japanese mythology. The Tarai Currents suddenly looks like a metaphor for the balance between the 3 powers, doesn't it? So let's indulge this train of thought for a moment. What if Joy Boy had 2 brothers? But unlike Luffy, who has 2 brothers that were not by blood, What if Joyboy had two brothers that were his blood brothers? Maybe they were even triplets. Alright, so I think it's time I reveal Joyboy's name. So I believe that Joyboy's name was Lamu. To keep things simple from now on in the video, let's just say that whenever I say Lamu, I'm talking about Joyboy. Alright, so we have Lamu, and his two brothers' names were Taimu and, wait for it, Imu. That's right, and what if the Tare Currents was an acronym for the initials of the three brothers, as in Ta, La, I? What's more, I'm theorizing that Joyboy was a brother to Imu, as in this Imu, and on top of that, there was a third brother called Taimu. So their full names would be Nerona Taimu, Nerona D Lamu, and Nerona Imu. I only gave Lamu as in Joyboy the D initial, as I believe the D is only tied to Lamu. The three brothers did not see eye to eye, I don't think. Some of you may already know this, but the family name Nerona, when written as katakana, can form the elements that make up the kanji for kami, as in God. Taimu is a wordplay on time and time, which is the same when written in katakana. The idea here being that Taimu was god of time. The time is just linked to a herb that is used in Christmas dishes and works well with other plant-based One Piece character names like Clover, Basil Hawkins, Dr. Kureha, Crocus, and Ingo. I believe that Taimu may have been an engineer and an inventor like Frankie and Vegapunk. Lamu, as in Joyboy, is a wordplay on a lamb, rum, Lamu, which is an island in Kenya, and I also think it's a homage to the character called Lamu from Urusei Yatsura, a character created by Rumiko Takahashi sensei. In case you don't know, Rumiko, whose name inspired this character's name, is the most successful female manga artist and is the mastermind behind mangas such as Ranma 1/2 and Inuyasha. Finally, when you add D to Lamu's name, we get Doramu, as in drum. Suddenly we get a whole new meaning to the epithet of drums of liberation, Kaiho no Doramu. I also believe that Lamu was a musician. Finally, we have Imu, most likely the eldest of the three. Most of you already know about how the katakana for Imu can form the elements for the kanji for Buddha, or that Imu in reverse reads as Umi, the ocean. What you may not know though, is that Imu in Japanese can also mean doctor. Therefore, I think that it would be super interesting if Imu was indeed a doctor at one point. You may have a little concern right now, since you may know that the mu in Imu means void. Now, a void is certainly not a fitting theme for someone like Joyboy, right? Well, let me clear some things for you. The kanji for void, as in mu, can indeed be used for negative words like muri, meaning impossible and unreasonable, or muimi, which means meaningless, and mu by itself, which does in fact mean nothingness and void. However, mu is also used in words like mugen and musu, meaning infinite and countless. Therefore, the meaning of mu for the three brothers could be something like this. The mu for Taimu, the god of time, is Musu, meaning innumerable or countless. What if Taimu, who had dominion over time, could access countless parallel universes? The mu for Lamu, the god of drums, and the embodiment of sun god Nika is Mugen, as in infinite. This is the infinite possibilities given to those that are freed and liberated by him. And finally, the mu for Imu, the god of the ocean and void, is simply Mu. I believe this is a reference to how even in our world, 3.5 billion years ago, life started from nothingness in the ocean. This idea really excites me because you could have a lot of fun with how the three brothers see the same thing as being entirely different. Perhaps Taimu uses his powers for being able to access different timelines for his own gains? After all, if you had that kind of power, wouldn't it be tempting to change the fates to your advantage? Maybe Lamu uses his powers to give those around him endless possibilities, like the sun whose rays gives energy to all living things. Lamu made it his mission to raise others up. And finally, Imu. I mentioned that Imu means doctor. I sense a certain despair from this character. Perhaps he used to believe that he could save others and cure the world, but something traumatic happened to him, and now he believes that everything is pointless, or that the people are a disease that needs to be cured, and maybe he was possessed by a spirit of some kind. He doesn't even think twice anymore about turning others into mu, nothingness. We already know that slavery and freedom is a major theme in One Piece. We see aspects of this on almost every island that Luffy and his nakama visit. Now, let's talk about the dark history of the spirit of pirates known as rum. But in order to talk about rum, we must first talk about sugarcane. You see, slaves were what drove the sugarcane industry. The Portuguese enslaved Africans in plantations and became the world's largest sugar exporter by the 16th century. The slaves were forced to plant, fertilize, grow, and transport the sugar canes. They also extracted the juices from the canes by crushing them and boiling it to create crystallized sugar. Through this process, a byproduct called molasses was created. Fermented molasses was enjoyed by the slaves and the poor as sweeteners, and eventually someone distilled this fermented molasses, and thus rum was born. By the 17th century, the rum trade began in the New England colonies. The rum trade became part of a triangular trade between Britain, the Caribbean, and Africa. In this triangular trade, rum was sent from Britain to Africa. There, rum was traded for slaves, who were then sent from Africa to the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, the slaves worked in the plantations to grow and process more sugar canes. From the Caribbean, sugar and molasses was then transported to Britain, where they distilled more rum. More rum would then go to Africa to be traded for more slaves, thus creating an endless spiral of true evil, a looping current like the Tarai current. So, the question becomes, if Joy Boy, the warrior of liberation, lived on Enies Lobby, but Enies Lobby is one of the points of the Tarai currents, which metaphorically fits with the triangular trade, a dark stain on human history, how does that make sense narratively? I think personally, it could be resolved in any number of ways, but I think also part of the excitement of One Piece is the mysteries. So if we go ahead and reveal all of them before Oda gets his chance, that would only be ruining the story for some people. Now, is that a bit of an excuse because I can't find concrete proof to solve this question? Yes. Moving swiftly on. We also see slavery in the history of Christmas. During the time of legal slavery in the United States, Christmas was the only time of the year when slaves were given an extended break. The slaves celebrated with food, music, and dancing. Some slaves even used this extended break as an opportunity to escape. Saturnalia, an ancient Roman festival and one of the predecessors to Christmas, was celebrated in honor of the god Saturn. In Roman mythology, Saturn was the god of agriculture who reigned over the world in the Golden Age. Saturnalia was a celebration of banquets, gift-giving, and partying. Gambling was also allowed, where the roles of the master and slaves were apparently reversed in some cases. Some stories say that the slaves were treated to a banquet. Some stories say that they feasted together, and some stories even say that masters were the ones to serve the food to the slaves. The slaves were apparently even allowed to disrespect their masters without punishment. So, for the duration of the festival, slaves were given a small hope of equality and freedom of speech, debatably a cruel tradition to give hope and then to take it away from them every single year. Since if freedom can be so easily taken from you, is that truly freedom? So, why rum? To which I say, why not rum? And this question actually goes out to Oda-sensei. Oda-sensei, why don't you show rum more frequently in the story? After all, One Piece is a pirate story with heavy ties to sake and to themes of slavery. It would only be fitting to have the spirit most heavily tied to pirates and slavery be a common guest in the story, wouldn't you say? The first time we see the mention of rum is on Drum Island. Dr. Kureha first talks about it just in passing. We then see Chopper reference it in the form of Rumble Ball or Ramburuboru. The next time we see, as far as I can tell, is in the anime only, when Blackbeard is seen holding it in Mocktown during that iconic scene. But that's kind of it. I don't really think rum gets mentioned all that much.